All right. I think we are on Facebook Live now. Welcome, everybody, for joining Emerging Revolutionary War for our weekly happy hour on Sunday night. We started this at the beginning of the COVID shutdown, and we've had so much fun doing it. We figured we'd keep going, and we've had some great interaction with some of our viewers. We appreciate you guys joining us. Hopefully, you've had a good weekend, and you're sitting back with a good beverage. I'm having a Old Dominion Gold Leaf tonight. I'm not sure what my friends are having, but they can introduce their drinks as they speak. Tonight, we're going to do a little bit more pop culture. We've had some pop culture happy hours the past month or so. And tonight we're talking about movies and TV shows of the Revolutionary War era. So we're going to do French Indian War for our friend Billy here. He's a French Indian War fan. We even go up the War of 1812 if anybody would like that. But we figured we would do this because every week when we go online, our great friend Jeff Black, who is one of Mark Maloy's good friends, always brings up the Patriot. And we figured, Mark, we would just dive right in. Go ahead and make Jeff happy if he's watching. We'll just go ahead and let you jump off, Mark, and start talking about Mel Gibson and the Patriot. Because I know it's your favorite.
Well, yeah, Jeff Black, he just had a baby this past week, so I don't think he'll be watching tonight, but we'll see.
Not dedicated.
But yeah, no, you see my background. I got the Patriot up there, and I feel like it's every historian I know, it's everybody's favorite movie to hate. A lot of crap they pile up on the movie, and some of it's warranted, some of it's not. But generally, I'm a fan of the movie, and I think I'm a fan of the movie for a couple reasons. First of all, for me personally, it came out in the year 2000 is when the Patriot came out. This is when I'm about 16 years old at that time, so this is I was in high school. And it's a big blockbuster, big screen movie. I kind of got the real Hollywood treatment. The first and really only Rev War feature-length film, I think, that's gotten that kind of major production value to it. And I got to say, watching it as a 16-year-old and seeing the action scenes and all that kind of stuff, it really made the Revolutionary War much cooler than it really brought the history off of the screen, and it got me interested. And I think that's probably one of its greatest values down the road. Is I think it's got a lot of people interested in not just the Revolution in general, but really the Revolution outside of just George Washington and the Northern Theater. I mean, going into South Carolina and having the battles that happened down there. And so I don't know, for as far as getting people interested, I think the movie is fantastic. And then as a reenactor and somebody who has done living histories and has done interpretive events for people, it has, at least 15 years to 10 years ago, it was the touchstone. So you could have a group of kids and say, have you ever seen the movie Patriot? At least half of them have seen it. So you could then say, like, okay, you saw how you could use it as a touchstone where you could all of a sudden meet people with something they could understand. In addition to that, I think the movie's great because I think it shows how violent and how bloody the war was. So much of the Revolution, people think the powdered wigs, the romantic paintings. You don't think of a volley being fired into a group of men and guys getting shot all around you, people hacking each other with bayonets and axes. A cannonball taking a guy's head off, which is probably one of the most iconic scenes of the movie. I think those kinds of brutalism in the movie really brought an important aspect of the war out, which is it was a very, very bloody, messy war. It also showed you how loyalties went on all sorts of different sides. You have the loyalists, you have the British, you have Mel Gibson, who really just wants to stay out of the entire thing, but is kind of dragged into it, which an important part of the story because there's a lot of people in the colonies that did not want to be involved in this war. When armies are marching over their properties, all of a sudden they become involved. Now everybody's going to bring up, putting all the civilians in the church and burning it to the ground, and they're going to bring up these atrocities that didn't happen on that scale. But atrocities did happen during the war. People's homes were burned. Civilians were killed. Not quite in that same way, but that's Hollywood taking their literary license. All the movies we're going to talk about tonight, all the different miniseries, television shows, all that stuff, they're all going to be using artistic license. And so this is no different. So anyways, generally, in my opinion, I think that The Patriot really kind of, for all of its flaws, and believe me, I've heard pretty much every argument of all the flaws. Especially, I mean, this is, reenactors sitting around a campfire. The movie comes up a lot. I know reenactors that are involved in the filming. And I've heard, a lot of people complain and gripe. But the one thing is everybody's seen it. And like I said, it provides that touchstone for, I think, a lot of people.
I have to agree with Mark in a lot of ways. I mean, I even dug out my special edition extended cut of The Patriot. So I'm right on board there with you, Mark. I mean, I can remember seeing it in the theaters, and I think you touched on a lot of salient points, one of which is the level of violence that's depicted in this film. I think it really helped to dispel a lot of that romanticized myth of the American Revolution. I mean, although the American Civil War, almost 100 years later, does have some of that romanticized myth to it, I think it's more so in the American Revolution. And I think one of the aspects of that violence that it pays tribute to, it ties into another Civil War topic, which is the movie Glory. You talk about that iconic moment in the movie The Patriot, where the cannonball takes off the head of that soldier. And if you think about the opening scenes of the movie Glory, how Glory kind of set off this touchstone moment in cinema for Civil War films, with Ken Burns and then Gettysburg and so on and so forth. I think The Patriot has that iconic moment as well. Not only does it harken back with that cannonball scene, but it also kicks off a whole host of interest in Revolutionary War topics and films in the early 2000s. So I would definitely agree with that as well.
So I knew Mark was going to bring this up tonight. And full disclosure, for those who don't know, last November, a bunch of us in ERW went up to Lake George and had a great time. And on the way up there, we watched The Patriot in the minivan we took. And sadly, we knew, all of us knew every line. So I have to admit to that. But I did some research really quick about box office numbers, right? And I think Mel Gibson, we could debate Mel Gibson for a long time about other issues, but Mel Gibson's is really known for more Braveheart than he is The Patriot. But I just realized this: Braveheart, that came out in 1995, only made $213 million, and The Patriot, which came out in 2000, made $215 million. So actually, it did better in the box office. Now, of course, 5 years difference, but it was a better box office hit than Braveheart. Of course, Braveheart's also like 10 hours long, so that has
an amazing film that also has all these historical inaccuracies. I've heard it there too. And I've heard the criticism too that The Patriot is exactly the same movie as Braveheart, except
right
in America. So and it's Mel Gibson killing British soldiers, similar to Braveheart.
It's the only reason I'm on this call this evening on this is because I'm the only Ohioan. To fulfill the one moment in the movie The Patriot. Tell me about Ohio.
That's a good point, but Dan, let's be honest. The only reason you're on this call is because Phil was tired of doing these calls every Sunday night. But hey, real quick before we jump on, keep going. I mean, one of our watchers, Dennis Martin, brings up a point that I was going to bring up about the scene with the family and the enslaved people on the beach there along the coast of South Carolina. He calls it, looks like a Jimmy Buffett concert pre-party. It is very, rosy in that portrayal. So
yeah,
definitely idealized.
I think that is one of the primary criticisms of the movie is the way slavery was pretty much sidestepped entirely, almost to the point, where they show them all living happily on this beachside resort or whatever. But to their defense, when they were trying to figure out, okay, this is going to be, this plantation owner, Benjamin Martin, by having him, if they made him a slave owner, all of a sudden in Hollywood circles, he cannot be a hero in the film. And I think the recent statue destroyals and all that other kinds of stuff that's going on in the country is showing really how, people don't like their history complicated. They really like it very simple. So the simple way to make Benjamin Martin a hero, rather than go into a complex character who was both a slave owner and fighting for the American cause, and you can still root for him in the film, but still understand that he was involved in the institution of slavery. They just said, just say that they were free people working on his farm there. And yeah, they took a total sidestep of that entire issue. But like I said, I don't think an American audience is able to really kind of get the nuance and try to, in 2 hours, have a film where you're rooting for Mel Gibson's character and also make him a slave owner.
No, but I think they also touched on another aspect that ERW had a great revelry, which was that of African Americans that served in both armies. Yes. During the war. And, the Patriot, although it was, almost like a subplot to the story, at least touches on that aspect as well. So although you're not getting that development of the entirety of not only slavery and African-American involvement in both armies, you are getting a nod to the topic, hopefully provoking audiences to dig deeper and look further into those stories.
That's true. I did I didn't mention, the Occam character. Yes. An enslaved person who joins with the American cause, and they do show some of that. Some of the Patriots not liking, one of the characters, not wanting to arm him and things like that. And then by the end, how they have, of course, come to the agreement that this is a good thing. And at the very end, the last scene, they're rebuilding the house, which I think is supposed to be like this metaphor of them building the new nation. Here, formerly enslaved person who had fought on the American side, and then the other Patriots, including the one who was the bigot, who is then all of a sudden reformed and on his side. There they are building the new nation. I think that's kind of how they end it, tie it all up with a nice bow at the end. But they do show, when they show that the freed people who are working on Benjamin Martin's farm are taken by the British. Later on in the final battle scene, you do see some African Americans in the British ranks, which is kind of interesting that they show, some of them are going into the British Army at that time as well.
So let's shoot it down to Billy, who of all four of us is the only one that has a new book that just came out. Over his left shoulder there, A Handsome Flogging, Battle of Monmouth Courthouse, highly recommend it. So Billy, I think you're going to take us to the French-Indian War. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, real quick to comment on the Patriot. My earliest memory of the Patriot, I saw it for the first time when I was in third grade. And if you remember, this is the time when everybody is switching over from VHS to DVD. So this was actually the first, I believe, one of the first, if not the first movie that my family actually watched on our new DVD player. And that was really my first real introduction visually like that as a teaching tool to the Revolutionary War, and what got me hooked on that. So again, back to just how movies are so important, because they can, introduce people to these various subjects where they might not take or find a book and pick it up and read it. But if they can see it on the big screen and they're entertained by it, they might catch the bug. And it might, even if the movie's historically accurate or not, it still might force this person to then gain an interest to go and learn more about the subject.
And also, just on the point of that was my first DVD too. That was happening. But one of my favorite parts of the movie is the musical score, which is done by John Williams. And it's fantastic. I think it ranks up there with all of John Williams' other greatest hits. But it's still on my car, when I'm driving to a historic site or whatever, I got that playing. So.
Is following up on that comment, Mark, one of the interesting things is John Williams did an interview shortly after the movie came out about the soundtrack. And he said it was one of the hardest soundtracks he's ever written, because he wanted to create a main melody or a main theme that did not capitalize on or did not retread any of the typical Revolutionary War type songs, such as Yankee Doodle. So coming up with something that was memorable but didn't roll out some of the musical tropes of the 1770s, created John Williams, the composer of Star Wars and Indiana Jones, all these huge soundtracks and movies. Provided him with one of his greatest challenges. So that interview's out there on the web. Definitely look it up if you're interested in how John Williams created this soundtrack.
I'll have to check it out. Another interesting thing I heard is that Harrison Ford was originally offered the role of Benjamin Martin, but he turned down the role because he said he read the script and he said it boiled down the American Revolution to a revenge story. Which is kind of interesting because I think he's right about that. And actually, when you watch the movie, as far as like the causes of the war, makes up, I think, a very small part of the actual movie. And it's also interesting too when you think about the title, "The Patriot." And you have a big picture of Mel Gibson on there. Mel Gibson really wasn't the Patriot in this movie. It was really Heath Ledger's character, his son Gabriel, who was the Patriot, and it was Mel Gibson's character, Benjamin Martin, doesn't come up to becoming a Patriot until after he's reluctantly drawn into it after his house was burned and a couple of his kids got killed. And so I don't know. I think that's interesting to think about, and I also think it's interesting, back to the historical accuracy, that they gave them all fictional names. So it's Benjamin Martin. It's Tabington. They're all, they fictionalize these characters rather than make it Francis Marion or Thomas Sumter or any of these characters. It was kind of a composite of all of these, which I thought in the long run is actually great because, if it was Francis Marion or whatever, people would have a very incorrect view of who Francis Marion was or all this other characters.
Now I'm gonna pivot back to Billy for a moment, and
please do, because we've got 20 minutes on the Patriot.
Patriot. Oh my! We should have just had this on the Patriot alone.
And Jeff Black's not even watching, and this is so disappointing. But go ahead, Dan.
So Billy said that this was the first movie he had seen on DVD or third grade, so probably about 10 years old, and I can only imagine what's going through you and your parents' mind as they're watching Mel Gibson take his hatchet and axe and down the trail, and having his kids help him rescue his family members. But I think one of the things I wanted to touch on that scene, Billy, before I let you take over, is how it kind of reinforces one of the mythologies of really how Americans or colonists fought the American Revolution. And Rob, you touch on this in your book on Lexington and Concord. It's that moment in the film where they're, Benjamin Martin and his kids are almost fighting like, Native Americans. They're fighting Indians hiding behind trees and picking off officers and things of that nature, kind of almost bringing to life that idealized version of the road of the British from Lexington to Concord so early in the film, The Patriot. But I can only imagine, Billy, you seeing that with your parents in the third grade on DVD at home.
Yeah. I mean, they encouraged it. They always encourage my interest in history. And I definitely remember recreating the scenes where he is trying to rescue Gabriel. I had the fake wooden axe from medieval times. I was using that as a hatchet against the redcoats. But yes, my favorite movie probably of all time, definitely. It was a movie that got me really, really, really hooked and introduced to the French and Indian War. And when you say French and Indian War movie, I'm sure everybody knows what movie I'm going to say, because there aren't many out there. It is, of course, the Last of the Mohicans, the Daniel Day-Lewis version, not the one from the early 20th century, because that one is awful in my opinion. But The Last of the Mohicans, obviously based on a novel from the early 19th century by James Fenimore Cooper. I think it is a fantastic depiction. We talk about the brutality of the Revolutionary War in the Southern Theater. This is really the brutality of warfare in North America in general during the middle to latter half of the 18th century, especially when you're dealing with the Native Americans. And its main focus is obviously a romance story, but the battle that it's really centered around is the siege of Fort William Henry, which anniversary we just had at the beginning of this month, between August 3rd and August 9th. And then August 10th is the anniversary of the famous massacre of Fort William Henry, where those British and colonial troops who had just surrendered to the French are leaving the fort, and they are attacked by the French allied Indians, who feel betrayed by the Marquis de Montcalm, the French commander, that they have not gotten their loot, they have not gotten their trophies, and now they're going to take matters into their own hands. And that's probably one of the greatest scenes in military history movies, is that massacre scene, as well as the siege scenes. Okay, for this movie, they rebuilt a $1 million replica of Fort William Henry just to burn it to the ground and destroy it. And the siege warfare scenes in it is probably the most accurate depiction you'll ever see on the big screen of 18th century siege warfare. It's phenomenal. Even though the massacre itself is really blown out of proportion, where basically everybody is killed, not true. And in fact, they have all of the 35th Regiment of Foot, the British there, are getting attacked by the French allied Indians. It was actually mostly the colonials who were with the British there that were being attacked. The men from Massachusetts, from New Jersey, from Connecticut, at the rear of the column, not the front like they depict in the movie. But just thinking about it, I know we watched that as well on our way up to Lake George in preparation. Yeah, and the scene right when the Indians are in the woods getting ready to ambush this British column, and all of a sudden you hear that war whoop. It really, it sends like chills up and down your spine. You can't even imagine what it would be like to actually hear that in real life and know what is obviously coming next. And then all of a sudden you see some rush out of the woods and these individual pops of musket fire. It's an awesome scene. It really is.
And last Mohicans, they have some of the best quotes throughout the whole movie, and I think they do a great foreshadowing of really showing how this empire conflict going on the frontier just foreshadows the American Revolution like crazy. I think it's when one of Monroe's daughters is saying, the faster the French guns blow the British off the continent, the better it will be for these people here. I mean, pretty heavy foreshadowing. And then, it's interesting now. I'd be interested in this. There's a director's cut of Last Mohicans that came out. I think it's been controversial for some people, because I think some people like it, some people don't. But at the end of the director's cut version, there's a scene where I forget the older Native American guy's name is, but he's standing there looking over the thing with Hawkeye next to him, and he says, one day, more people, white men will move in here and they'll live their lives and blah, blah, blah. And they kind of like foreshadows this, westward expansion. And he's like, but once we were here. That's how he ended. And I thought that was so cool from a historian's perspective, because, whether it's, Trenton or whatever else, you can go to places where the world has moved on, but at one time, these very important people who had very interesting stories once occupied these places we're in now. So I thought that was so cool.
Now, Billy, you brought this up, so I've got to ask. You brought up that Last of the Mohicans, unlike the Patriot, is based on a book by James Fenimore Cooper. There's the age-old question: is the book better or the movie better? Now, I can remember being inspired by the movie to go out and pick up Cooper's book, and I think the first chapter is like 20 or 22 pages, and it's about a tree. And I'm like, man, this is just going to take too long to get into the heart of this. So I was a much bigger fan of the movie than Cooper's work of early 19th century writing. What's your opinion on book or movie?
I've never read the book either, because like you said, the first 20-something pages or so are about basically nothing. And remember, this is it's only one work of an actual multi-volume story known as the Leatherstocking Tales. But this is the one that focuses on the French and Indian War. And I remember I've done obviously some SparkNote reading on it, just trying to find, what were the differences between the movies and books. And I believe one of the weirdest differences that they chose to change in the movie was the reversal of Monroe's daughters, who in real life didn't even exist. But you had Alice and Cora. Cora was the one who was with Daniel Day-Lewis, Nathan or Hawkeye, and then Alice was with his Native American brother. They were actually reversed in the book for some reason, but then in the movie they chose to put Cora with him and then Alice with the brother. I don't know why. I never found any reasoning for that.
And that rule isn't always true. I always look at Jaws. I don't know if you ever read the book Jaws, but I read that and watched the movie, and I think the movie's way better than the book Jaws.
Well, you know, like the Patriot, though, Last of the Mohicans has an iconic soundtrack as well.
Oh yeah, it's a great soundtrack.
By Randy Edelman, same guy who did the Gettysburg soundtrack.
And we looked at that the whole way. We were driving up around Fort George. I mean, I just get in the mood.
It really does.
5 dorks riding in the van listening to history soundtracks and movies on the way to Lake George. Sounds like a great time, Mark. Well, for those who follow us on Facebook, we'll be doing it again this November. Not sure where, but we're doing it again. Hell come high water, we're going somewhere. So Mr. Welch, Mr. Ohio, as you self-proclaimed. Actually, Dan, you have brought about a good discussion about music. You are Mr. Music Man of the group here as a music teacher. So thank you for bringing up those soundtracks. So some early American war movies to you, sir.
You know, I'm going to have to shift away from a movie per se and get into probably the elephant of the room when it comes into television or miniseries, you know, and that would definitely be John Adams. And I think the reason that I go with Adams is because it covers such a wide swath of history in a short number of episodes. I believe it's only, I think, 6 episodes in all. But you really go from, you know, causes of the American Revolution, grievances of the colonists, all the way up through, you know, the Declaration, through the post-war years, the Jefferson presidency. You really get this whole package of the Revolutionary era before, during, and after. So I'm going to have to go with Adams, and not only am I going to have to go with Adams because of that, but as the music guy too, I'm going to have to go with Adams because of the soundtrack. And, you know, I know for you young whippersnappers out there, you're like, what's that thing? All we have are MP3s. You know, if I can't get it on iTunes, I don't know what it is. But yeah, the soundtrack I think also is great. Is a great soundtrack, and it's, you know, one of those where when we talk about the Patriot soundtrack, John Williams, huge soundtrack composer. We talk about Last of the Mohicans, Randy Edelman. Not only did he do Gettysburg, but a whole host of other films. Rob Lane, who did the score for John Adams, really doesn't have a whole lot of known compositions out there or known soundtracks out there. So, you know, John Adams for him is this big moment in his career. So musically, historically, Paul Giamatti as John Adams, I think you just can't go wrong with John Adams.
Oh yeah, as a Emmy Award-winning extra in the, I do have to say it's pretty epic. So I was actually going to school at William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, when they were filming this, and there's all this buzz because Tom Hanks produced this, and this is, I think, shortly after Band of Brothers came out, so it's kind of like there's a lot of buzz about this new miniseries. And they were filming the scenes that take place in Cambridge when the Washington's army is up there. It's actually Colonial Williamsburg, the public hospital there, and they were looking for extras. So me and some of the other college company, William & Mary people, went and spent a couple days on the film set. You could see me briefly in the background of one of the scenes. You look closely, and but it's funny because it's interesting to see how these productions are made. I mean, it is intense. I mean, they put so much money into this. It was like a 70-degree fall day, I think, or spring day when they filmed it, and we were all pretending it was like snowing. They had fake snow over everything. Everybody had to go through makeup. They picked some people to be the smallpox victims, and they had to be in makeup for like an hour or two, and they came out just covered with pox. And they make it real. A lot of work went into it. And I got to meet Paul Giamatti briefly, said hello to him, and who I think is the real star of the show, and that is David Morse, who I think does the best.
That's George Washington.
Best George Washington. Yep.
It's like an old retired George Washington, though. He's super old. He wasn't that old at the beginning of the war.
hung up in minor details.
Yeah, he has the presence of Washington
Nope.
in that series.
It's,
Oh my
When he
gosh.
walks,
This would
when
be a
he
good
walks in
transition
front of the
of talking
Continental
next.
Congress. Oh,
He has the stature, the gravitas.
Yep.
I mean, when I read letters by Washington, I mean, it seems like it comes right from the voice of David Morse when he's, doing some of his things. I mean, everything you read about him, people talking about, well, he walked in a room, the room hushed, and everybody turned and stared at this guy. When, they show that, like, when Adams is getting ready for the inauguration and Washington just walks in, and I mean, and then when he's doing the inauguration and Washington's talking so quietly, and Paul Giamatti as John Adams starts like weeping because you just realize what a great man this was. And I don't know, I haven't seen it. Washington was very reserved. He's very quiet. Now we can go into the Washington depictions here because Washington, Jeff.
I have a list.
Who I know you like from Turn. There are many different, but I don't think anybody's nailed it quite the way David Morse did as far as getting across. And then even some of the things like the minor details that he gets in there, as far as he's like arguing with John Adams, and he stops and like because his teeth are hurting, and then you just realize, yeah, he has dentures. These you see them.
That's called directing. Someone told him to do that, Mark.
Listen, Mark, you're not going to win this argument because Rob believes that the best George Washington on film
Here we go.
is Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. I mean,
Well, that's
Jeff Daniels.
I do think Jeff Daniels does a good job, but no, I mean, I like John Adams too. I like about the music, the intro with the flags and the music is fantastic,
Which is borrowed directly from a Civil War film. The
Gods
opening to Gods and
probably,
Generals.
yeah.
Yep.
Unfortunately, but Tom Wilkinson to me is the star of that movie. I mean, as he's the best Benjamin Franklin I've ever seen. I mean, when I think of Benjamin Franklin, when you read his biography and you read his letters and you study him, he seems to be that guy. The George Washington, I mean, David Morse is a great actor. Don't get me wrong. I love him as an actor. I just think they have him too old. I mean, he's there in Philadelphia accepting command, looking as if he's about to die. I mean, that's not how George looked. And
I agree. He was a younger, vigorous man.
And that's why I like Ian from Turn, because he is a younger, very athletic looking kind of, energetic person who we know he was. But anyway, so yeah, no, I mean, we can go all day about David Morse.
But also in John Adams too, the guy that Jefferson, I thought, did a fantastic.
Yeah.
But there are just so many great lines. And even, I mean, me and my wife, we both love the John Adams. I mean, we'll watch that every year. I mean, just to see also Abigail Adams, her interaction with John, how they grew old. And it's heartbreaking at the end too, when they pass away. That you feel really connected. And I think it ties up the entire story perfectly with that quote by John Adams saying, if we, owe posterity, all the struggles we went through, if, do what you will with them, but if you don't, I forget exactly how the quote goes. I'm butchering it, but it's a wonderful way to tie it up saying that, they sacrificed all this stuff for this country, and for us to waste it would be, he would repent forevermore. And then, trying to get you to that place, I think it really makes you it made me want to go visit Peacefield. So I went up to go see Peacefield, see the houses, go to the rocks where they bring John Quincy to watch the Battle of Bunker Hill, went to their burial place to stand in between John and Abigail Adams, knowing their whole history is just phenomenal.
And how can you be a fan of Hamilton, knowing all these great things? Hamilton is the death knell of Adams.
Yeah.
Sit down, John.
The way I think Hamilton was much more like. There's a great scene where Adams goes in to talk to George Washington. While he's talking to him, he hears a little cough in the corner, and he looks behind the door, and there's Hamilton,
What's up?
He's curled up in the corner there, and then how Hamilton's talking about how he's dreaming of empire. Adams says, you're either stark raving mad or I am. I think the film did a great job portraying Hamilton.
I think Mark really summed it up when he talks about the ending of the John Adams series, and that quote kind of summing it up. And I think that for me is perhaps why it's my favorite, is that not only is it the microcosm of John Adams' life, and that, you know, the end of the 6th episode wrapping up his life, but it's also that macro too, of really wrapping up that whole era from the very beginning of you know, the grievances and the Boston Massacre, all the way up through the country that it has become after Jefferson, after Adams, you know, as we move into the early 19th century. So that's why it sticks with me.
Well, and at first I was like, I didn't understand why they were making a John Adams miniseries, and I kind of still don't. You know, it's like you think you would do, Washington or Jefferson.
David McCullough's book. That's why.
Exactly, but what I love is how they tied all. You know, they used John Adams as the centerpiece, and then you build all these people's stories around this one character. So it's not like none of these stories aren't being told. They're all being told. They're just through the prism of John Adams. So I think it does a great job of telling many of these people's stories.
I think a lot of that, to me, Mark, is that John Adams is so overlooked, right? He's vice president. He's only got one term. And then, most people know who Sam Adams is more than know John Adams because of beer. So
True. Especially on this channel.
Right. Well, yeah. Yeah. But I think because I think the miniseries really elevated him to a certain level where people actually grew some respect for him. I think I don't think it's been built yet, but there was a movement, and then Congress passed appropriations for a John Adams memorial, in DC. And a lot of it's because of the attention that David McCullough's book and the miniseries got to it. So, Mark, go ahead.
It's hard for me to watch the Boston Massacre scene now without thinking of Mark on the 250th on the ERW page doing.
Mark had more drinks that night than probably everybody in the movie at that time. Speaking of Mark, someone's bringing up The Crossing, and since Dan brought up Jeff Daniels as Washington, so Mark, since you're the Trenton and Princeton guy, we got to go to you on this. I like The Crossing. I watch it every year on Christmas. I know what's wrong with The Crossing, but in your opinion, as a Trenton guy, what are some of the major flaws of the movie Crossing?
Now again, yeah, there's flaws. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is, I talk about this in my book. My book, Victory or Death's about the battles at Trenton and Princeton, and the piece of art, Washington Crossing in Delaware, has made that the center item, which is really interesting because it was an important military maneuver, but I mean that's really all it was. And so the focus of this movie is really, that's the centerpiece, is the crossing of the Delaware. They do a great job of building up, just how terrible situation the American cause was in. I think they do a great job of bringing in characters like Glover and Knox and all these kinds of people who are in this important moment of American history. They do throw in Alexander Hamilton, although in an incorrect role where he's an aide already rather than being with his artillery.
And Horatio Gates, our very famous Mark Maloy, can quote Horatio Gates in the movie.
Yeah. That's one of the great scenes of the movie, is showing Gates just, ripping apart George Washington's plan to cross the Delaware, which, of course, this meeting never actually happened. But Gates did feign illness. Gates did go to Baltimore, where the Congress had gone, and he was looking for Washington's command. But they really make him look like a real traitor in this movie.
Well, yeah, threatened to shoot him.
Yeah, he tells Washington, he says, "You and your colonial cronies are no soldiers. Now this revolution is over."
Yes.
I think the problem that I have with The Crossing is, we're talking about the portrayals of George Washington on film. The jokes that Washington makes as they're getting in the boat.
Move your fat ass, Harry.
Yeah, like just not Washington-esque. The Washington that I envision in history is just cemented in John Adams.
Well, yeah, no. And I think it's all efforts to kind of humanize Washington as a person. And I do think I think Jeff Daniels does a good job of kind of getting the emotions that I imagine Washington was feeling really under the skin. I don't think he would show the kind of emotions, slamming his fists on the table and standing up and yelling at Gates, "How dare you, sir?" Like, don't think Washington would ever do that. But certainly Washington felt these things underneath, and he just he was much more reserved than that. But I think as far as communicating to a modern audience, I think that it does a good job of like, oh, Washington is just not this stuck-up guy on the $1 bill. He had all these emotions, and he had all these feelings, and he had his back up against the wall. And they do a good job of showing the crossing, and then they march into Trenton, and then I think the Battle of Trenton scene is not great. I mean, they do show the violence. They show people being bayoneted. I really wish they showed them all kind of like firing their muskets, which, there's only one musket shot. And it's the one guy who somehow puts wax on his musket to make it fire, and he shoots and kills Rawl. Which, again, it's all fiction. There was, the Americans did get in there. They were firing volleys, even though it was in a snowstorm, which of course isn't depicted either. But then they kind of end it right there at the end of the first Battle of Trenton. I wish they would have gone on and showed, I think the real drama is more the second battle and the Battle of Princeton. Washington's finest hour, in my opinion, is there in Princeton battlefield.
There's no famous painting of that battle. It's the crossing.
This is another movie that's based on a book. So this is based on Howard Fast's novel called The Crossing. So I think they're, with what they're doing, and also, the budget, this is not as high dollar as like The Patriot, but for what they're doing with it, I think it is effective. The music is really good. I like the music, even though it's, synthesized. It's a pretty good tune they got to it. And I like Rob, I'll watch it around Christmas time as well. That's sort of, my favorite Christmas movie. So everybody else can watch The Christmas Carol or Miracle on 34th Street. I'll sit down and watch The Cross.
So Billy, let's talk about Benedict Arnold's movie with Kelsey Grammer playing George Washington. I own that as well. I've watched that a couple times. I love the scene when Kramer goes in. Oh, I'm sorry, Washington. I'm just kidding. Goes into the house, and Peggy is sitting there cowering in the floor, and Washington's angry, but he does kind of let her go, which he does in real life. So give us some thoughts about the Benedict Arnold miniseries. Actually, I guess it's a TV movie.
And I've put it on YouTube a few times, but I can never get through the whole thing.
Oh, come on.
No, but this is the thing I want to transition into the actual show that I think really depicts at least Benedict Arnold and George Washington well, and that is Turn. But for me, like these historic movies, I don't necessarily watch them for historical accuracies and stuff like that. Like I'm not one of those people who likes to pick the movies apart. I more so watch it for entertainment. But the thing that chaps me the most is when you don't cast a person well or a historical character, and you're looking at this person on screen and knowing and reading and learning about this person, it doesn't feel right. It's out of place. And I think a best examples that you guys would probably agree with for bad casting in like a docudrama would be in the U.S. Grant series we just had. A lot of the Confederate generals in there, like they were awful. Like
they're awful.
For like a historian, like it completely just deters you from the actual what's going on the screen at that point. But yeah, I don't like the casting in the Arnold movie. I love the casting in Turn. We already mentioned Ian Kane from Turn. I think he's by far the best George Washington in anything. Sorry, Mark.
Somebody agreed with me. Somebody said on the comments I saw that they didn't like his voice, which I agree.
But I did. Like who
knows what Washington sounded like?
I think he was great. He was still, when he talked, he was very stoic but very reserved as well. Like you said, like he was a man of honor. But he would still, when he felt dishonored, he would have those outbursts in the movie, and you would take him seriously. And even though he was a secondary character, kind of, when he was on screen, he commanded that scene. He was very, very, very good. And the same goes for Owen Guillaume, I think his last name is, who played Benedict Arnold. Like when I'm reading about both Washington now and Arnold, those are the people that I'm envisioning in my head as those men when I'm reading about them. I think the story, obviously, with Arnold and his treason in there, there's a lot of liberties taken to it, especially with that love triangle between Peggy Arnold and John Andre, which obviously there's no real.
What's the thing? The braid hanging
Oh
off.
yeah, that
Oh,
braid.
it's terrible. Yeah.
I don't know why they did that.
I don't know. Because most of the movie, like honestly, 60% of it was about romance. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of scandalous romance too.
But then there are some certain small things. Now, you just wrote a book about Battle of Monmouth, and they just Battle of Monmouth, and like I was all excited because it's like building up to the Battle of Monmouth, and I was like, but it's just like the simple, like they filmed it in like wintertime, and it's just like you couldn't like schedule the filming so at least it looked like it was summertime. I just couldn't believe it. And like the scale of it looked so looked like a little skirmish.
But, you know, the series turn, though, for me, does something that Billy talked about at the very beginning this evening, which is how, you know, despite some of these things having historical inaccuracies or costuming inaccuracies, or, you know, shooting a battle scene that took place in a warm climate versus during the snow, for Turn, the character John Andre, you know, fascinated me, and that led me to, oh man, you know, I don't know much of his background. I don't know enough of him before he comes across the pond, as they say, and gets involved in the American Revolution. So, I mean, that led me to go out and buy the new biography of Andre. So I think, you know, all of these things that we've talked about this evening, although they have some issues, if they lead people to get involved and get interested and read more and go to battlefields, then I'm all for them. Especially when you agree that the best George Washington was in John Adams. I mean, you know.
Oh, Dan, who invited Dan anyways? So let's start. We've been already talking about some bad movies, or some problems with movies we've mentioned. I don't think, and this is way before y'all's time. I'm the old guy here, but Al Pacino's Revolution movie, if you want to see a bad movie with a great actor, that's the one to go find online. Came out in 1985. I've never heard one good review of that movie. I've watched it twice in my life, and you know, I think there was, I mean, I was a young kid at that point. There was a lot of, you know, hope for that movie because Al Pacino, you know, that's his heyday. I mean, that's big, and it's horrible. If you have not seen it, I highly recommend watching it. It's on YouTube, or you can get it on Netflix too, actually. But that's a pretty bad movie. And I'm gonna throw a second one out there, a TV miniseries that I was just looking at online here, that's got great reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, which drives me crazy. But in 2015, Sons of Liberty came out on the History Channel. I had high hopes for that. And then as soon as I saw Sam Adams jumping from building to building with his two revolvers, I had to turn it off. And then the scene, as a Lexington and Concord guy, you know, I wrote a book about that. The scene of Lexington Green isn't even close to being accurate.
And that is more egregious when it's coming from the History Channel.
Yes.
You know, it's one thing when the director of Godzilla is making The Patriot and gets some things wrong, but when the History Channel is doing this stuff and getting things wrong, it's like it's another class of terrible. So I think those are things that you could pick apart. Sons of Liberty, I pick that apart all day because their whole purpose is supposed to be, you know, educating people, in my opinion, and doing it, you know, through an entertaining way.
But that's a different era, History Channel. You know, the era of the Sons of Liberty is Ice Road Truckers and Ancient Aliens and all that stuff. But like, you know, I pulled out of my archives the Revolution miniseries from the early 2000s. The one year I taught 8th grade American history, I used a lot of those mini episodes. They took a responsibility to educating more back then.
Oh, yeah. Well, you got to go back a little bit further because that one's all right. That's okay. I was in that. I'm a reenactor in some of the background.
How many times does Mark gonna name drop which movies he's in?
Well, he is an Emmy Award winning actor.
I mean, Mark, are you ever at home with your family? Seriously.
But we got we got
Billy dropped.
Yeah, go back another like 5 or 10 years before that, the History Channel came out with what I think is the best documentary of the Revolutionary War. It's a 6-part A&E and History Channel did, which I think is better than that one because it doesn't rely so much on reenactors as much as it does historic paintings and things like that, which for me personally, I enjoy seeing that documentary for myself.
Which episode are you in, Mark?
I'm throughout, because that's the other thing. They recycle a lot of reenacted footage throughout the whole series, but it's all right. But people are asking too, what would be a good
Right.
to make, and I think that's something interesting to think about. And one of the things I think should be made, as I mentioned with The Crossing, I think there should be about the whole 10 Crucial Days, like an actual movie. And there is a good one that they just came out with that it's played at the Mount Vernon Theater at George Washington's home. They made it's a 20-minute little video, but it kind of goes through the 10 Crucial Days, which is kind of nice. But I think what would be really cool is to do kind of like a Band of Brothers type mini series that follows a unit in the Revolutionary War that sees a lot of action. I think the 3rd Virginia Regiment would be perfect because you could do everything from, New York all the way through to Charleston. I think that would be pretty cool.
That would be cool. And I'm a big 3rd Virginia guy, but hopefully Phil's watching. I can't tell if Phil's watching, but I agree about Band of Brothers, 3rd Virginia, but I think the Maryland line would probably be a better focus because the Maryland line is in New York. They're everywhere. They end up in Camden. They end up they're the only people in Camden that actually stand for more than a few minutes. I don't know. I'm a big Virginia guy, as you guys know. I love giving Phil grief about Maryland, but I think the Maryland line would probably be more fitting for a Band of Brothers type story.
Or even Joseph Plum Martin, his memoir, he's in a lot of stuff. I mean, he's
like the Forrest Gump of the Revolutionary War. I mean, he really is. You read his memoirs, the man's everywhere.
True. It's true. So what other, and Mark's right, people have been asking, what are some other characters or moments in early American Revolutionary War era history that movies should be made about? Dan?
I think there needs to be more Southern Campaign related movies.
I spent a half hour on the Patriot, Dan.
I know, but I'm saying I hate the fact that the Patriot is the only one that really covers, that is a representative example of all the events in the Southern campaigns. So many of the other movies that we talk about all focus on Pennsylvania northwards, that we get really very little play in Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina.
Billy?
I don't know, honestly, anything. Like, it's really like, how often do we get something on the Revolution that comes out? Once every 5-7 years, if that. Just anything.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. Somebody mentioned too in the comments, with the 250th coming up. Now, somebody sent me, I think Ken Burns is looking to
2025. It's a 5-part series
about the Revolution. But is Hollywood going to be looking for some of these stories? I heard that Philbrick's Bunker Hill was supposed to be.
Yeah, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon were supposed to be involved in that.
They bought the rights to the story.
But yeah, I'm wondering as we start gearing up for the 250th, if there's going to be more Hollywood interest in telling some of these stories. It'd be interesting to find out.
It's fitting if Ben Affleck and Matt Damon bought that, with the town, like how thick are the accents going to be in that movie, right?
Mandatory subtitles in the theaters.
And I think, really, I think the Yorktown campaign, because you have, movements up in New York, you have a naval battle, you have a lot of things that happen right for the Americans in the Yorktown campaign, right? Keep in mind, these guys take a week to communicate, and things just happen at the right time for what happens at Yorktown to end up happening the way it does. And I think that's a great story. It ties in Washington. It ties in some of the other famous characters that people are aware of in the Revolution. So I think
you got to trust the French. Trust the French.
Back to the Patriot. I swear to God.
This is what's going to happen though too. Is you wish that they would focus on something like that. And then when they, mess it all up on the big screen, you'll be complaining about it for the next 15, 20 years about the stuff they got wrong.
But I think there's a lot of stories out there that where the old saying of, the truth is stranger than fiction. There's so many of these incredible stories from the American Revolution that are already written in history that wouldn't need much, that I think American and international audiences would be drawn to watching.
Yeah. One movie we're almost out of time here, but one movie that no one has mentioned, that's one of my favorites, and Mark will know it. I'm not sure if Dan or Billy would know it. It's the longest running movie on the big screen. It's been on the big screen since 1957. Mark, you should know this movie, Story of a Patriot.
Yep.
Shown at Colonial Williamsburg. I watched that movie as a young kid, and if I get a chance to go to CW, I always try to make a chance to go see that movie. It's got Jack Lord as John Fry. It talks about how Virginia, the House of Burgesses, is debating about what to do. It shows the scene of Washington breaking the walnuts there at Raleigh Tavern with his bare hands. And it shows Virginia, as always, Mr. Maloy, leading the way to push the colonies into independence. And it's still on. If you guys ever get to go to Colonial Williamsburg, Dan, I know you go there occasionally. Catch the movie. It's the longest running movie in America.
Wow.
So
real quick, I had to step away for a minute. I didn't know if we brought up, especially for you, Rob, did we bring up April Morning?
We did not. No. That's great.
Yeah.
Embarrassing. I did not bring that up. That's a good point.
Mr. Lecture Concord?
Right. Well, Bill, you bring up as a good movie or a bad movie?
I think probably one of the better depictions of the actual what took place at Lexington Green. Definitely,
Right.
Especially with the British marching onto the field. They actually looked like real British soldiers.
Right. No, we did not bring that up. Thank you for doing that. Anybody have anything else they want to contribute to this enlivening discussion about the Patriot? Oh, I mean, Reservoir movies and TV shows. Well, thank you guys. I didn't ask what you guys are drinking. Mark, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking some German Paulaner Hefeweizen.
And I think, Billy, you're drinking your regular
the
Coors
usual.
Light.
Right.
We really need to get Billy some beer. We really need to send Billy some beer. If you guys are watching right now, just send us a message. We're going to start a fund for Billy to buy good beer. Really, don't let Billy drink that kind of beer. Dan, are you partaking? I haven't seen you have anything, Dan.
I am. I have been partaking. For those of you that know me, I am proud to be a Youngstown native. So
Great
I'm
Lakes.
drinking a solid beer for a solid people. Penguin City Beer. It is a Youngstown native beer company started a couple years ago. Penguin City, after Youngstown State University. Our mascot is the Penguins. So Penguin City.
Well, Dan, I'll see you in a few weeks when we do our Civil War tour. Please bring some.
I will.
So we can try that. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you guys for watching. I want to remind you all that we have our ERW Symposium on May 22nd, 2021. We bumped it from this September for obvious reasons to next May. We're partnering with the City of Alexandria on that symposium. All the information for registration. It's $60 for an all-day symposium of 5 speakers. Everything is online on our website for our blog, also on our Facebook page. You can find the information there. The next week, Billy, what are we talking about next week? You're heading up next week.
Next week, we're talking about Benedict Arnold. Now, this is a subject that comes up a lot on ERW revelries, but this time we were actually focusing on his treason in particular and his service with the crown afterwards. So not him as a Continental Army general and American hero, but an American traitor.
Right. All right, great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we'll see you again next Sunday. Have a good week.